The spaceship was gliding through the cold, vast emptiness of space. Its crew, a group of experienced explorers, were used to the silence that filled the void. Captain Aaron Thompson looked out of the window, his eyes scanning the distant stars. Their mission was simple: explore new planets and gather information for Earth's future colonization efforts. They had been to many planets before, but none like this one. It had been weeks since their last landing, and they were all ready for something new. The planet they were approaching, designated Alpha 9, was one of the most intriguing they had encountered. It had a breathable atmosphere, strange rock formations, and signs of old structures scattered across its surface. As they neared the planet, their sensors suddenly picked up an unusual signal coming from deep within the planet's surface. It was faint, but enough to catch their attention. The team had been trained to be cautious. They had to investigate. "Captain, we've detected a strange signal. It's coming from a location near an old abandoned base," Lieutenant Karen Shaw reported. She was at her station, her fingers flying over the controls as she studied the data on her screen. "Are we sure it's not interference?" Captain Thompson asked, his voice calm but filled with curiosity. "We've double-checked. It's definitely a signal," Karen confirmed. "It's not a standard transmission. Could be something. Or someone down there. Prepare for landing. I want a full crew ready to investigate," Captain Thompson ordered. His heart raced a little. Space exploration was full of unknowns, and they had all learned to expect the unexpected. But something about this signal felt different. Something about it felt wrong. The spaceship's engines roared as it descended toward the surface. The planet's atmosphere was thick, and the clouds above swirled in odd patterns. The crew could see the remnants of buildings scattered across the land. Old, worn-out structures covered in dust, as if abandoned long ago. The ground was cracked and dry, and there was no sign of life anywhere. But that signal, it had to be coming from somewhere. As they landed, the crew members began to suit up and prepare for their first steps onto the strange planet. They were all on edge, but none of them voiced their concerns. They were trained professionals, and fear was something that didn't belong in space exploration. "Let's move out. Stay alert," Captain Thompson said, leading the way as they exited the ship. The dust rose from the ground with every step they took, making the air thick and hard to breathe. The ground was uneven, with sharp rocks sticking up in some places and deep craters in others. They made their way toward the abandoned base, their footsteps echoing in the silence. As they reached the entrance, they noticed something strange. A figure stood just inside the doorway, watching them. At first, the crew thought it was just a shadow or a trick of the light, but as they got closer, they realized it was a man, a human man. He was standing alone, wearing a simple jumpsuit, his face hidden by a strange helmet. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes seemed to glow in the dim light. It was as if he knew exactly who they were. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, waiting. Who are you?" Captain Thompson called out, his voice steady but cautious. The crew stopped in their tracks, unsure of what to do. The man didn't respond, but he tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. "What is this?" Lieutenant Shaw whispered to the captain, her eyes wide with confusion. "Humans aren't supposed to be here. This planet was supposed to be uninhabited." Captain Thompson didn't answer right away. He couldn't. The situation was too strange. He stepped forward slowly, his hand resting on the weapon at his side. "I'm Captain Thompson of the Earth Exploration Fleet. We're here on a mission. Who are you?" The man finally moved, lifting his hand to his helmet and removing it slowly. What they saw beneath it sent a shockwave through the crew. The man's face was pale, almost sickly white, with sharp features that seemed almost too perfect. His eyes were bright blue, glowing slightly, like they were artificial. He smiled at them, a slow, unsettling grin that made the hair on the back of their necks stand up. "I'm not from your world," the man said, his voice calm, and almost amused. "But I know all about you. I've been waiting for you." The crew exchanged nervous glances. "What do you mean you've been waiting for us?" Captain Thompson asked, his hand tightening on his weapon. The man's grin widened. "You'll understand soon enough," he replied. "But first, you need to know something. You've come too late. Everything you thought you knew about this planet, about the universe, it's all wrong." The crew members stood frozen. The strange man's words hung in the air, thick with mystery and danger. They had no idea who this man was, or how he knew so much about them. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just any human they were dealing with. This man, whatever he was not from their world, and he was far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. The crew stood there, staring at him, their minds racing with questions. What was he talking about? Why was he here? And most importantly, how were they going to survive this encounter? They had no answers yet, but one thing was certain: this mission had just taken a turn into the unknown. The crew was still reeling from the shock of meeting the strange man. His glowing blue eyes seemed to pierce through them, like he could see into their very souls. Captain Thompson took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had faced countless dangers in space, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. They were no longer dealing with just an abandoned base or an unknown planet. They were dealing with something that didn't belong. "Tell us who you are," Captain Thompson demanded, his voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. He wasn't sure what he expected the man to say, but whatever it was, he was ready for an answer. The man didn't immediately respond. He just stood there, watching them with that unsettling smile on his face. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he took a step forward, his movements smooth, almost unnaturally so. The crew tensed, their hands resting on their weapons, ready for anything. "I told you," the man said in a low, almost playful voice. "I'm not from your world." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Lieutenant Shaw took a step closer to the captain, her voice barely a whisper. "What does he mean? Is he from Earth?" The man chuckled softly, as though amused by the question. "No," he replied simply. "I'm not from Earth. I've never been there." The crew was silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Captain Thompson took a step forward, narrowing his eyes. "Then where are you from? Why are you here?" The man smiled again, his teeth sharp and white. "I'm from a place far beyond your understanding," he said, his voice now tinged with something darker. "You see, humans like you've only scratched the surface of what's possible in this universe. You think you're the only ones capable of achieving great things, but there are others who've gone much further." He stepped back slightly, his eyes glinting with something like pride. "I come from a race of humans who have evolved beyond what you can even imagine. My people have transcended the limits you know, and we've waited for centuries for you to catch up." The crew stood frozen, struggling to process what they were hearing. Evolved humans. A race beyond their understanding. It sounded impossible. Captain Thompson took a moment to absorb the man's words, trying to make sense of the situation. "So, you're saying you're, some kind of superhuman?" he asked, his voice steady, but laced with disbelief. The man nodded slowly, as though the captain's question was almost too simple. "More than that. My people have learned to harness the power of the universe itself. We can manipulate the very fabric of reality. We have powers beyond your comprehension." The crew's eyes widened at the revelation. Lieutenant Shaw took another step forward, her face pale with fear. "If that's true, then why haven't you shown yourselves to us before? Why wait until now?" The man's smile faded slightly, his expression turning serious. "We were hidden. We had to stay in the shadows, watching and waiting. Your people were not ready. You weren't ready to know the truth." His voice grew colder. "But now, the time has come for you to learn. Now, we reveal ourselves. Captain Thompson felt a chill run down his spine. He could feel the tension in the air, thick with the weight of the man's words. They had never expected to find anything like this on their mission. This wasn't just some unknown life form or abandoned base. This was something much bigger. Are you telling us that you're here to— what? Take over? The captain asked, his hand resting on the weapon at his side, though he didn't draw it. His mind raced, trying to piece together the implications of this strange meeting. The man shook his head, his smile returning, but it was no longer comforting. No, we're not here to take over. We're here to offer you a choice. A choice to join us, to evolve like we have, but only if you're strong enough. The crew stared at him, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what was being said. A choice to evolve. It sounded like madness, yet everything about this man, the way he moved, the way he spoke, suggested he wasn't lying. But what did that mean for them? What did it mean for humanity? Captain Thompson was about to speak again when the man raised his hand, signaling for silence. His expression became more serious, more focused. "You see," he said slowly, "my people have been watching Earth for a long time. We've seen the wars, the chaos, the constant struggle for power. We've seen what you're capable of. And now we've come to decide whether or not you're ready to join us. But know this, the time for weak humanity is over. If you choose to stand in our way, if you choose to fight, you'll regret it." The air seemed to thicken with tension, and for a moment, Captain Thompson felt like he was suffocating. What was this man really offering? Was this some kind of test? Was this humanity's last chance to prove itself? Or was it a threat, a warning of something far worse? Before the captain could respond, the man turned and began walking toward the entrance of the base. He paused and looked over his shoulder, a final, lingering gaze. "Think carefully, Captain. You have a lot to lose," he said, his voice carrying an eerie calm. "But the choice is yours." With that, the man disappeared into the shadows of the base, leaving the crew standing there, in stunned silence. The air around them seemed to vibrate with the weight of what they had just learned. They were no longer alone in the universe, and whatever this man and his people were, they had the power to change everything. The crew stood in stunned silence, unable to process the weight of what had just happened. The man, no, the being, had walked away into the darkened recesses of the abandoned base, leaving them with 1,000 questions and no clear answers. Captain Thompson's mind was racing. He had been a part of many dangerous missions, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. "We need to find out more," Lieutenant Shaw said, her voice shaking slightly. She had been the most skeptical of the group when they first landed, but now even she couldn't deny what they had just witnessed. Captain Thompson nodded, his eyes scanning the empty base around them. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the spaceship in the background. "We'll move in. Stay sharp. This place could be full of surprises." The crew followed him, their footsteps muffled by the thick dust that covered the floors. As they entered the base, the faint hum of the old machinery grew louder, almost as if it were alive. The walls were lined with strange symbols, markings that none of them could recognize. It felt like they had walked into a time capsule, a place frozen in time. Yet, despite the age of the structure, everything felt too intact, too well preserved, as though someone had been here recently. "Something's off about this place," Sergeant Alan Reynolds said, his voice low. He was the team's weapons expert, and he had a knack for sensing danger. "It's too quiet. No dust in the air, no signs of decay. It's like we're being washed." Captain Thompson held up his hand, signaling for them to stop. He motioned for Shaw to take the lead. They moved cautiously through the base, entering a large chamber with high ceilings. In the center of the room was a massive structure, almost like a pedestal. Strange blue lights glowed from within it, casting an eerie glow on everything around them. "What is that?" Private Marcus Harris asked, his voice tinged with awe. Shaw stepped forward, her hand hovering over the surface of the pedestal. "I don't know, but it's definitely not something from Earth. Look at these markings. They're not like anything we've seen before." Captain Thompson stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Could this be the source of the signal? Is this what brought us here? Before anyone could respond, a sharp sound echoed through the room, followed by a sudden hiss of air. The pedestal began to hum, the lights flickering as if coming to life. A low voice, distorted and unnatural, reverberated through the chamber. "Welcome to the beginning of your end." The crew froze, hearts pounding in their chests. The voice was familiar, but it wasn't the voice of the man they had encountered outside. It was something darker, more sinister. They immediately reached for their weapons, their fingers trembling. The voice continued, "You are not ready. You were never meant to understand." The lights on the pedestal flared, and the ground beneath them shook. The air grew colder, and the temperature in the room plummeted. The crew was surrounded by an oppressive silence, broken only by the hum of the pedestal. For a moment, no one moved, no one dared to speak. The tension was unbearable. Captain Thompson's mind raced. He had been trained for moments like this, moments of terror and uncertainty. But this was beyond anything he had ever experienced. The strange human, or whatever it was, had warned them. He had told them that their understanding of the universe was limited, and now they were standing at the precipice of something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. Suddenly, a bright flash of light shot from the pedestal, blinding them all. When their vision cleared, they were no longer in the chamber. They found themselves standing on a barren landscape, a desolate wasteland under a blood-red sky. The ground was cracked and scorched, and the air smelled of ash and decay. In the distance, massive, dark shapes moved across the horizon, casting long shadows over the land. The sight was surreal, like something from a nightmare. "What the hell is going on?" Lieutenant Shaw whispered, her voice trembling. "We're not on the base anymore," Captain Thompson said, his voice steady but filled with disbelief. This is another world." It didn't make sense. One moment, they were inside the base, and the next, they were transported to this alien landscape. The crew looked around in confusion, their hearts pounding in their chests. This was no ordinary base, no ordinary planet. It was a trap. They had walked right into it, just like the man had planned. Before anyone could react, a series of loud, mechanical noises echoed from behind them. They turned to see massive metal doors opening in the distance. Through the gap, they could see the flickering light of another chamber, but this one was far more ominous. Shadows moved within it, and the air seemed to hum with power. "Move," Captain Thompson shouted, his voice urgent. "Get back to the ship. Now." The crew didn't need to be told twice. They ran, their hearts racing as they sprinted toward the opening, the ground beneath them trembling with each step. The darkness of the chamber loomed ahead, and they could hear the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, following them. It wasn't just a sound. It was a feeling, a presence closing in on them, like a predator hunting its prey. As they neared the entrance to the ship, the ground cracked open beneath them, and a massive, glowing figure rose from the earth. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were twisted alien. Its eyes burned with an unearthly light, and its body crackled with energy, as though it were made of pure power. "Get to the ship. Go. Go," Captain Thompson yelled, pushing the others ahead of him. They were almost there, but the figure was moving faster, its glowing form closing in with every passing second. The crew reached the ship, scrambling to get inside, but the figure was too fast. It reached out with one massive arm, sending a shockwave through the ground. The air around them crackled with static, and the doors to the ship slammed shut just in time. They were safe for now, but they all knew it wasn't over. Whatever had just happened, whatever they had just witnessed, was only the beginning. They had been warned, but they hadn't listened. And now there was no turning back. The crew gathered inside the ship, hearts still racing from their narrow escape. The hum of the ship's engines filled the air, but it felt like the calm before a storm. Captain Thompson paced back and forth, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The desert landscape, the mysterious voice, the strange figure, none of it added up. They had gone from a routine mission to a nightmare in the blink of an eye. "Captain, what the hell just happened?" Lieutenant Shaw's voice trembled as she spoke, but there was an edge of determination in her tone. "Where are we? What was that thing?" Thompson stopped pacing and turned to face her. "I don't know, but what I do know is that we're no longer on that base. Whatever that man was, whatever we saw, it's not from our world. And that thing out there," he paused, trying to find the right words, "that wasn't human, and it wasn't a machine either. We need to find a way to stop it," Sergeant Reynolds said, his voice steady. "We can't just sit here and hope it goes away. We need to figure out how to fight back." The crew exchanged glances. They were all thinking the same thing. There was no way they were going to leave this place until they understood what they were up against. Whatever force they had encountered was too powerful, too dangerous to ignore. But the question remained, how could they fight something that defied everything they knew? "Captain, maybe it's time we focus on the pedestal we found," Shaw suggested, her eyes scanning the control panels in front of her. That thing was clearly important. It seemed to react when we approached it. What if it's the key to all of this? Thompson's brow furrowed. It made sense. The pedestal had been the focal point of everything. The strange energy it emitted, the voice that spoke to them, the way the man had led them to it. It was all connected. But how? "We need to investigate that pedestal more. If it really is the source of all this, maybe we can find a way to stop whatever it is that's coming for us," Thompson said, a newfound resolve settling over him. "Let's prepare to return to the base." The crew immediately began preparing for their next move. They knew they had to act quickly before the situation escalated further. The ship's systems hummed with activity as the crew set their course for the base. The atmosphere was tense, each member of the team lost in their thoughts, processing the events of the past hours. They had already faced the unimaginable. Now, they had to face the truth. They were not alone. They were not even the first humans to explore the universe. The man outside, and the creatures that followed, were proof of that. After what felt like hours, but in reality, only minutes, the ship touched down once again on the alien world. The base loomed ahead, its dark silhouette a stark contrast against the blood-red sky. The air was thick with tension, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "We need to stick together," Captain Thompson said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "Stay sharp. We don't know what's waiting for us in there." The crew stepped off the ship, their boots crunching on the rocky ground. As they made their way back toward the base, the oppressive silence hung over them. The base was as still as before, but now there was an almost unnatural sense of foreboding. It was as if the walls themselves were watching them, waiting for the next move. They reached the entrance, and the doors slid open with an ominous hiss. The familiar hum of the pedestal greeted them once again, but now there was something different. The lights on the pedestal flickered, pulsing as if alive. The air felt charged, electric. The crew hesitated at the threshold, each member feeling the weight of what lay ahead. But there was no turning back now. They had come this far, and they had to finish what they started. As they entered the room, they saw the pedestal, just as they had left it, glowing with a strange blue light. But now, the space around it felt different. The walls seemed to shimmer, as though the very fabric of reality was warping. The air was thick with energy, and the ground beneath their feet vibrated slightly, like the hum of a distant engine. "What is this place?" Shaw whispered, her voice barely audible. "I think we're inside it," Thompson said, his voice low. "Whatever this thing is, I think we're in the middle of it now." The crew gathered around the pedestal, their eyes scanning the strange symbols that adorned its surface. It was like nothing they had ever seen before. The markings seemed to shift and change, as if they were alive, moving in ways that defied logic. "This doesn't make sense," Reynolds muttered, trying to make sense of the symbols. "It's not even a language we recognize." Captain Thompson studied the pedestal carefully, his eyes narrowing. "I don't think it's a language. I think it's more than that. Whatever this thing is, it's like it's trying to communicate with us. Or maybe control us." The pedestal hummed louder, the lights flickering more rapidly. Suddenly, the symbols stopped shifting and became still. A deep, resonating voice filled the room, reverberating through their bones. It was the same voice they had heard earlier, the one that had warned them. "You are not ready," the voice boomed, its tone cold and powerful. "You never were. You thought you could survive, but you are nothing compared to what's coming." The crew stepped back, fear rising in their chests. The voice was like a weight, pressing down on them, suffocating them. It felt ancient, like it had been speaking for eons, like it had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. Who are you?" Captain Thompson demanded, trying to steady his voice. The voice didn't answer immediately. There was a long, painful pause, and then it spoke again, its voice laced with a chilling finality. "We are the ones who have always watched. We are the ones who will decide your fate." The ground shook violently, sending the crew sprawling to the floor. The pedestal crackled with energy, and the walls around them began to warp and bend, as if the fabric of reality was tearing apart. The crew scrambled to their feet, trying to find a way to stop whatever was happening, but it was too late. The pedestal's glow intensified, and the voice spoke once more, a warning laced with malevolent power. "The time has come. You have no choice but to face what you've awoken." With a final, deafening roar, the energy of the pedestal exploded outward, filling the room with blinding light. The crew shielded their eyes, but the force of the blast knocked them to the ground. The light consumed everything, and for a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their own heartbeats. When the light faded, the room was silent. The crew lay on the floor, shaken but alive, their minds spinning with the terrifying realization that whatever had been awakened, it wasn't done with them yet. The crew slowly regained their senses, their heads aching from the blast of energy that had flooded the room. Captain Thompson was the first to stir, pushing himself up off the floor, his body trembling from the force of the shockwave. He wiped his eyes, trying to clear the blur, and looked around. The room was different. The pedestal was no longer glowing with the intense energy it had once emitted. Instead, there was an eerie, unsettling calm. Shaw was already on her feet, checking her equipment and scanning the room for any signs of danger. "Captain, what the hell just happened?" she asked, her voice shaky but sharp. That was unlike anything I've ever felt before. Thompson took a deep breath, steadying himself as the vibrations from the energy wave slowly subsided. "I think we just activated something. Something we shouldn't have," he said, his voice grim. "But it's not over. Whatever that voice was, it's still here." Reynolds groaned as he stood up, rubbing his head. That thing, it wasn't human. It felt alien, ancient. He looked around at the crew. "We're not dealing with something from Earth. This is something much older." "Right," Thompson replied, glancing back at the pedestal. It had lost its glow, but the air still felt thick with energy, as if something lingered in the space. "We need to find out what we're dealing with. We have to keep moving." The crew exchanged uncertain glances. They had already been warned. There was no going back now. They had crossed a line, and whatever consequences lay ahead, they would face them together. "Let's check the rest of the base," Shaw suggested, her voice hardening with determination. "There must be something here that can explain what's going on. The pedestal, the voice, they were all connected. We can't leave without answers." Captain Thompson nodded. "Agreed. Stick together and stay alert." The crew made their way through the base, their footsteps echoing eerily in the still air. As they ventured deeper, They discovered a series of chambers that were unlike anything they had seen before. The walls were covered in alien symbols, similar to the ones they had seen on the pedestal, but these were much more intricate, more complex, almost alive in their movements. The floor was uneven, the air cold and stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed for centuries. "This place doesn't feel right," Harris muttered, his voice low. "It's like we're not supposed to be here." "Keep moving," Reynolds ordered, though his own unease was evident. "We need to find something, anything, that can explain this." They entered a large, circular room at the heart of the base. At the center stood a massive structure, an obelisk of sorts, made of a smooth black material that seemed to absorb the light. The symbols from the pedestal were etched into its surface, but they were far more elaborate, stretching across the entire structure. The air around it felt charged, and there was a palpable sense of something dormant, waiting to awaken. "This is it," Shaw whispered, her voice reverberating in the silent room. "This is where it all began." Thompson stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment he got closer, the obelisk seemed to respond. The air crackled with energy, and for a brief moment, the room was filled with a low hum, almost like a distant voice speaking in a language he couldn't understand. "It's reacting," he said, looking back at the crew. This must be the heart of it. Whatever this place was, it was built around this." But even as he spoke, a sudden rush of wind swept through the room, making the walls groan and creak as if the base itself were alive. The hum of the obelisk grew louder, the symbols on its surface shifting and swirling like they were being written anew. Reynolds stepped back, his eyes wide with panic. "We need to get out of here. Whatever this thing is, it's not good." Before anyone could respond, the room plunged into complete darkness. The familiar hum of the obelisk stopped abruptly, leaving the crew in total silence. Captain Thompson's heart raced in the pitch black. He reached out instinctively, his hand brushing against Shaw's arm. "Stay close," he whispered. Then a voice, cold, distant, yet impossibly close, filled the room. It was the same voice they had heard before, but now it was different. It was louder, more forceful, filled with contempt. "You dare seek answers where none should be found." The voice echoed, its tone filled with ancient rage. "You do not understand what you are awakening." The lights flickered back on, but what they saw next nearly made them freeze in terror. The obelisk had changed. It was no longer just an inanimate structure. From the base of the black stone, tendrils of shadow had begun to reach out, snaking across the room like living things. They stretched toward the crew, pulsing with an unnatural life of their own. The walls, too, seemed to ripple, the symbols glowing brighter, moving faster, as if alive. "Get back," Thompson shouted, instinctively drawing his weapon as the tendrils began to shift toward them. The crew backed away, but the shadows seemed to follow them, crawling across the floor and walls. The ground beneath their feet trembled again, but this time it felt different. It was as if something massive was stirring beneath them, as if the very foundation of the base were coming alive. "We need to get out of here now," Reynolds yelled, panic rising in his voice. "This place is waking up. Whatever it is, it's not just a machine. It's alive." But as they turned to leave, the door to the room slammed shut, trapping them inside. The shadows seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, and the voice boomed once more, this time shaking the very walls. "You're too late," it said, a finality in its tone. "You have awakened that which should never be disturbed. Your fate is sealed." The crew rushed toward the door, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. The tendrils of shadow were closing in, their dark form twisting and turning like serpents. It felt as though the very air was suffocating them, pressing down on their chests. Thompson could feel the pressure mounting, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had no idea how to stop this, no idea what they had awakened or how to stop it from consuming them. Every instinct told him to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. "Think," he shouted to the crew, his voice sharp with desperation. "There has to be something we can do. A weakness, something." Shaw's eyes flickered to the obelisk, her mind racing. "We need to shut it down. Whatever power is coming from that thing, it's the source." The shadows were getting closer, swirling around them like a storm. "How?" Reynolds asked, his voice cracking with fear. "We have no choice but to try," Thompson said, his hand reaching toward the obelisk. Just as his fingers brushed against the surface, the entire room erupted in a blinding flash of light. The crew shielded their eyes, the force of the explosion knocking them off their feet. The tendrils of shadow recoiled, disappearing into the ground as the light continued to pulse in every direction. It felt as if the entire universe had been compressed into that single moment. Then, as quickly as it had started, the light faded, leaving only silence in its wake. The air was still. The shadows had disappeared. The room was calm once more, but something had changed. The crew stood there, breathing heavily, their minds racing. They had no idea what had just happened, but they knew one thing. They had only scratched the surface of a much darker secret, and now there was no escaping the consequences of their actions. The silence in the room felt suffocating. The crew stood frozen, their eyes scanning the now quiet room, searching for any signs of movement. The light from the obelisk had faded, leaving only the faint hum of the ship's systems in the background. But something had shifted. The tension in the air was thicker than before, and the uncertainty about what had just occurred weighed heavily on every one of them. Captain Thompson was the first to move. Slowly, cautiously, he approached the obelisk, his hand still trembling from the explosion of energy that had rocked the room just moments before. There were no more shadows, no more pulses of dark energy. The room was eerily still, but it felt wrong, as though the calm was merely the eye of a storm. "Stay alert," Thompson muttered, his voice low and strained. "We don't know what we just triggered, but it's not over. Whatever that thing is, it's still here." Lieutenant Shaw moved beside him, her eyes still scanning the room. "Captain, what was that light? That power?" It felt like it was trying to communicate, but it was different this time. It wasn't the same voice. It was like it was warning us. Thompson nodded, but his thoughts were far away. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of their experiences. The pedestal, the man they had shot, the voice, the shadows. It all felt connected in ways he couldn't fully understand. He was no longer sure what was real and what wasn't. But one thing was clear. They had made a grave mistake by coming here. "We have to get to the core of this," Thompson said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty. "The obelisk is the key. It might be the source of the power that's controlling everything. If we don't shut it down, it will keep growing stronger." Reynolds, still shaking from the previous events, was the next to speak. "Captain, we don't even know what we're dealing with. That thing almost killed us just now. It's not human, and it's not something from our galaxy. We don't have the firepower to fight it." "We don't need firepower," Shaw responded, her voice suddenly sharp. "We need to understand it. Whatever this is, it's a force we can't fight with weapons. We have to find out what it wants. Only then can we figure out how to stop it." Thompson considered her words, his gaze returning to the obelisk. "You're right, but we don't have time to waste. Whatever it is, it's been here for centuries, maybe even millennia, and it's been waiting for something or someone to come along and disturb it." "We disturbed it," Shaw said softly, as if realizing the truth. "We unleashed whatever it was that's been lying dormant." There was a long pause as they all processed the gravity of their situation. The fate of their crew, their mission, and possibly even their entire civilization rested on what they did next. The fear that had been lurking at the edges of their minds now gripped them with an icy certainty. They were far from being in control. They were trapped in the middle of something much larger than themselves. Captain Thompson made up his mind. "We're going to find answers. We need to get deeper into this base. There has to be more information, More about the obelisk, about what happened here. It's the only way we're going to stop this thing before it consumes everything. They left the central chamber and navigated through the darkened halls of the base. Every step they took felt heavier, as though the weight of the unknown was pressing down on them. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the distant hum of the base's failing systems only added to the sense of impending doom. As they reached a set of large doors, Shaw stopped. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing to an inscription carved into the doorframe. The symbols were unfamiliar, but something about them felt ominously familiar, like the ones they had seen on the pedestal, only more intricate and detailed. "This could be the control room," Thompson said, moving closer. "This is where they would have operated the obelisk, maintained it." Reynolds stepped forward, his hand resting on the door. "It's locked, but it doesn't look like a regular security lock. This is something else." "We don't have time to waste," Thompson said. "We'll find another way in." Shaw moved around the perimeter of the room, her mind working quickly. "There." She pointed to a narrow vent high in the wall. "We can access the control room through that. It's our best shot." Without another word, they climbed through the narrow opening, one by one. The vent was tight, the air stale and thick with dust. It felt as though they were intruding on something that had been abandoned for far too long. After what seemed like an eternity, they emerged into the control room. The space was vast, with panels and screens that seemed frozen in time. Yet there was something unsettling about the way the machinery stood, too pristine, too untouched, as though the room had been waiting, just like the obelisk. Thompson and Shaw moved to a central console, scanning the ancient controls. "This must have been their command center," Shaw said, her fingers dancing across the surface of the console. "These symbols, they match what we saw on the obelisk." "See if you can access any records," Thompson ordered, glancing around the room. "We need to know what this place was used for, and why they built it." Shaw worked quickly, tapping a sequence of keys on the console. A screen flickered to life, revealing a series of cryptic messages and data logs. The text was in the same language as the symbols they had seen earlier, but this time it was even more complex, layered with patterns that defied their understanding. "This is," Shaw's voice faltered, "this isn't a base, not in the way we think of one. It's a prison." "A prison?" Reynolds echoed. "For what?" Shaw's face grew pale as she continued reading. "This facility was constructed by an ancient civilization. They were trying to contain something, an entity, a force, something so powerful, they had to lock it away, deep within the heart of this planet." The crew gathered around, their attention rapt as Shaw continued to read. "It's not just a power source, it's alive. The obelisk, the pedestal, it's all part of the prison. And we've just unlocked it." A cold chill washed over the crew as the gravity of Shaw's words sank in. They had unknowingly set free an ancient evil, something far beyond their understanding. And now there was no going back. They were the ones who had unleashed it. "Can we stop it?" Thompson asked, his voice strained. Shaw looked at him, her expression grim. "I don't know, but I think it's time we find out." The room was thick with silence as the crew absorbed the weight of Shaw's words. Every breath felt like it carried the burden of their reckless curiosity. The facility, once believed to be a research outpost, was in reality a prison, holding something far older and far more dangerous than any of them could have imagined. Now, they had set it free. Captain Thompson stood at the center of the control room, his mind racing. The realization that they had been pawns in an ancient game left him with a sickening feeling in his stomach. They were no longer in control of their fate. This thing, this entity, was far beyond their understanding. It had been sealed away for a reason, and now they had cracked open the door. Shaw was the first to break the silence. Her voice was strained, her hand still hovering over the console. "I'm scanning the data logs, but there's nothing concrete on how to stop it. The language here is fragmented. It's as if the civilization that built this place didn't want anyone to know what they were truly locking away. "Then we'll figure it out ourselves," Thompson said, his voice steady but filled with determination. He could see the fear in their eyes, but they couldn't afford to let it consume them now. They had to act. "We need to get to the heart of this facility. There has to be a failsafe, something that can contain it again." Reynolds, who had been pacing nervously, spoke up. "Captain, I'm not sure we have the time for that. The longer we stay here, the more we're at risk. That thing is out there, and it's only a matter of time before it figures out what we've done." Thompson glanced at him sharply. "You're right, but we can't run from this. If we leave now, it could spread beyond this facility. We need to find a way to neutralize it before it's too late." Shaw nodded in agreement. The data logs indicate that the prison itself is a complex network. It's not just one obelisk or pedestal. The whole facility is part of a containment system. The only way to stop it is to shut down the core systems, but we don't have the full picture yet. "Then we need to dig deeper," Thompson said. "We've only scratched the surface." "Shaw, keep working the console. We'll find whatever we can use." The crew split up, each member searching the room for any clues that might lead to their salvation. The walls were covered in more symbols, more patterns, but none of them seemed to make sense in the chaos of their desperate search. The facility, though ancient and seemingly abandoned, felt eerily alive now. The air was colder, thicker, as if it were aware of their presence, as if it were watching them. Hours seemed to pass, but nothing new emerged. The lights flickered and hummed, their feeble glow casting long shadows across the room. The sense of being hunted was overwhelming, but they couldn't afford to be distracted by their fear. They had no choice but to keep moving forward. Shaw's voice finally broke through the silence. "I think I've found something," she said, her tone uncertain but hopeful. "It's a series of encrypted commands. Looks like a shutdown sequence for the core systems, but the encryption is unlike anything we've seen before." "Can you decrypt it?" Thompson asked, moving quickly to her side. "I can try," Shaw replied, her fingers flying over the console. "But we don't have much time. I'm not sure how long the system will stay online before the entity takes control." Thompson swallowed hard. "Do it. We'll buy you as much time as we can." The rest of the crew stood alert, their weapons ready, watching the door, the walls, every shadow. The sense of impending danger was suffocating, but there was no turning back now. They had come too far. As Shaw worked, Reynolds paced nervously, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. "You think we're even going to be able to stop it? I don't know about you guys, but I don't think it's just going to let us shut it down that easily. Keep your head in the game, Reynolds," Thompson snapped, though the fear was creeping into his voice too. "We're not done yet." Shaw's face was pale as she continued to work at the console. This is not just a shutdown. It's a complete deactivation of the containment systems. If I mess this up, it could trigger the entire facility to collapse." "You won't mess it up," Thompson said, trying to reassure her, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. "We'll handle whatever comes next. Just focus on the task." Minutes dragged by like hours, the tension thickening with each passing second. Shaw's hands were shaking, her breath quick and shallow as she typed the final series of commands into the console. Then, with a sharp exhale, she hit the enter key. For a moment, nothing happened. The room was still, too still. Then the console beeped. A low, ominous tone filled the room. "I've initiated the sequence," Shaw said, her voice trembling. "But the system is fighting back. It's trying to override the shutdown." The lights flickered again, and the walls seemed to ripple. The symbols on the walls began to glow once more, but this time, they were pulsing in sync with the console, creating a rhythmic, almost hypnotic pattern. The air felt heavier, charged with an unseen energy, and the low hum of the obelisk from earlier returned, growing louder, more insistent. "Brace yourselves," Thompson said, his voice low and commanding. "This is it. Whatever happens next, we face it together. The room trembled, and the lights dimmed. The ground beneath them rumbled, and for a split second, it felt as though the entire base was shaking apart. A roar, deep, guttural, and otherworldly, echoed through the walls, reverberating like thunder. It was the voice again, but this time, it was not just a warning. It was a declaration. "You think you can stop me?" The voice boomed. "You have unleashed that which you cannot control. I am eternal. You are nothing." The obelisk began to glow brighter, its surface cracking, releasing a burst of energy that sent the crew stumbling backward. The shadows returned, but this time, they were more than just tendrils. They were twisting, writhing entities, taking form in the space around them. Thompson gritted his teeth, stepping forward, his weapon raised. "We can stop you." With a sudden, deafening crash, the room exploded into chaos. The shadows rushed forward, coalescing into a massive, dark shape, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. The entity was awake, and it was furious. "Stay together," Thompson shouted, his voice steady even as the world around them seemed to implode. "We fight, or we die." And with that, they prepared to face the nightmare they had awakened. Whatever lay ahead, they had no choice but to confront it. There was no escape now, only survival.